The story is be'erich like this. We tried to figure out last week. Let me say the three shittas, and then we sort of got sidetracked in a little bit, but it's very negai. But we have to try to see how we could. Maybe it's relevant to a lot of other things. We keep on getting back into halacha, but try not to do halacha. So something like this. So let's assume the data. I didn't really start from the data question, but I'll show you in a minute. I did find how these two questions interface. They beferish interface, and it's a big. It's already information. I did some research. So I really want to get at a much deeper, at a theological question, right? At a higher level question. Again, we could talk about the relationship with this and halacha, but that's again be another. He has talks very nicely about it. Heschel in his book. I started reading on Shabbos, Torah Shemayim. About the connection of halacha and aguda was pinklich. At least he brings a lot of nice mekoides and he writes nicely. But kapunem is a very serious question. But I was started with the lamdish, with the agudische, like kabula, or the theological question, right? And the theological question is something like this. It's two levels, right? The first level, the shorish, is when we say that we could talk about kedusha, but if we're nachik luli, right? Kedusha Zazmanim, Kedusha Zamokim, Kedusha Bnei Udam, anything that we say this is heilig and this is less heilig or something like that. There's a real serious tifa question, which is, what does that mean, right? And you could sort of translate it to the question of what are mitzvahs bichlal, but I said last week, I'm not sure. That's already another way of framing it, I'm not sure, right? Like we could ask the question, why? I would say the question would be not why we have to do the mitzvahs, because that could have simple questions. The question would be, why are mitzvahs heilig? Same question, right? Why is tefillin dalet parshas? Why is this have some kedusha or some choiva, some value, more than anything else, more than, right? Talk about the divrei chol, or more than doing the idea of the mitzvah, let's say, in a different way. That's some relation to this. But let's skip that framing. But I talk about Zmanim Kedoshim or Mekayim Kedoshim and so on, right? That's a very yesodic question. What does it mean? We say Shabbos is heilig, Yom Tov is heilig. For example, we talk about Kedusha Zmanim, or say same thing, Yisrael is heilig, Yerushalayim is heilig, Beis Mikdash is heilig, whatever. Things like that. We could talk about, say Yidden is heilig, Kahanim are heilig, Ich weiß Malchus Beis David, different Bechiras, this Olam Shin and Nefesh. And it's a very serious question, what does this mean? Or I could frame it in a different way. How important is this? Or the way I framed it in the beginning was how real is it? I think it's a way that makes people very nervous when I talk about it. When I mean realism in a philosophical sense, right? In other words, how much does it exist outside the mind? Existing inside the mind is not fake. It doesn't mean that it's fake. Right, but that's a very problematic language because it makes people think that subjective is fake. But that doesn't mean fake. It just means that it exists inside your mind and not outside your mind. Not in the outside world. It's not a character, it's not a nature of the. For example, talk about Eretz Yisrael. Is there a nature in it? Yisrael, nature is the philosophical term for this, right? In the old, exactly. Is there nature? Does Yisrael have a nature which makes it heilig, and therefore we should go there? Or is it niskadish alidei b'nei Adam, or alidei through your actions, through your being Eretz Yisrael, something like that, right? Really, a shalav, we're the nature, we're the something like teva. Teva is, in the Aristotelian sense, right? There's some mehis, some essence of the things. That's what Aristotle's way of thinking about everything is. Maybe again, you could go back to that metaphysics also if you want to go one step even earlier, right? But is there such a nature, or is there just call it a schema, but lavdafka schema? Is it? We could say even is it niskadish al yedei Yisrael? Is it Yisrael kodesh? We could ask such a hakira, right? Did Yisrael become was Yisrael heilig? Kasher writes the hakira of. Can we ask such a hakira about Yisrael? Was Yisrael heilig by Bria Olam? In other words, it's the Teva and it's Yisrael. This is Mokim HaKodesh. Or did it become heilig by Avram Avinu coming there? Or by the Eibush making a mitzvah? You could even talk about it like this. By God making a mitzvah, and it gets tricky when you talk about God, because God also made the nature. But was it Yisrael? Did the Eibush tell Avram Avinu to go to Yisrael because it's heilig? Or did it become heilig because he told him to go to Yisrael?
Why did he tell him to go to Yisrael according to this? Whatever the reason is.
Maybe we could say 12,000 reasons. We could say because he wanted to go away from Choran, and this was the closest place that he could. Was it schlecht? Wanted to go away from the Lech Ma'aretz Chum U'Lat. Give him a new place where he could give him. So Minjan as the Teva Uretz was different. Or we could say we don't understand God. That's what God. And that point in history, that's why it's gets into like a sort of Tamei Mitzvahs question, right?
So where does the Kedusha come from? Explain the subjective part of
When I say subjective, I just mean, and this is one way of framing it, I have to get very clearly. Not subjective, I would call it, I called it nominalist last week, right? But nominalist would say there's no Kedusha really. That's a different way of saying it, maybe. You would say, but in the basic sense, there's one way of describing, when describe the whole Torah like this, right? The people, there's a way of this. Kabbalim generally think of the whole Torah like this, right? They don't think that the mitzvahs created the mitzvahs. The mitzvahs, let's say, talk about Sinai. This is a very good way of thinking about it, because Sinai, although we could be cholik, everything when I say cholik, that's to this episode, you could make it, you could disagree with my connection, but at least it's reasonable to think that this is the Tuli and the Shala of mitzvahs lefnei matan Torah. Right? According to Halacha, the way the Halacha, by the way, this is again goes back to what I was saying last week, Chazal, Halacha way of thinking is very much that the Torah starts at Sinai. Of course, there's some Midrashim that go against that, but Halacha, mostly, and the Rambam, for his own reasons, is very madgish this. But Halacha starts at Sinai. Sinai, the Mamad has Sinai, and whether it's a Mamad of that day, or with Abu Shuna, or whenever exactly it is, doesn't matter. But this thing we call Mamad has Sinai, actually, and very interesting, could talk about Shvius also. Mamad Asina in Halacha has halachic meaning, right? It's not only the Mamad Asina is not a Gili Milsa. That's when God gave us the Torah. It has a halacha. It's like the chalos of the Shibud or the Kinyan or the mitzvahs of the Torah happened at Asina. We talk about Mishpah Asina. We talk about it as like the day of Yom Haledes Chag, when the law became obligatory. Like sort of the Mushal, they sort of think of it. You could talk about it as a bris, or you could talk about it as like when they signed the Constitution, something like that. That's where it's not stam, it's not, but we get into a lot of things about Matan Torah, what I'm just, that's where the, right, that's, in other words, there's a real, in other words, but this is an attention with the idea, which is also in Chazal, of course, but it's more a medrash idea than a halacha idea, which is that Ovis Kimi Kol HaTorah Killer. Ovis Kimi Kol HaTorah Killer, if you ask this, why would someone say this? Why would someone even, where does the thought of Avram being Mekayim the Torah even come from? Why do we need it? What does it do, this Torah? What it really does, it's mafkia, the shoyrish of the mitzvahs from Sinai. In other words, from some event in which God said, these are the mitzvahs you should do, mikan va'elech, you should do these mitzvahs. And that's where the mitzvahs will get their Torah from, to a nature, to an ontological idea. Right? One of the big differences between these two ways is, and we imagined Ovis, of course, we could be chaylik on that, but if we imagined Ovis to be the smart people, the people that were, like it says, the hoilich lifnei Hashem, they knew what a yid has to know, right? They weren't mitzvah, but they were the people that were trying to be, right? So obviously, such a udma shulam, if you understand mitzvahs in the second theory, in the nature theory, natural law, we could talk about it, for example, obviously they should have done all the mitzvahs. Because otherwise you're saying that tefillin, for example, if tefillin is just happens to be that we went out of Mitzrayim and the Eibishter then made a mitzvah, and from then on there's an Indian to do that mitzvah, then there's no point of putting on tefillin, like all the Peshonim people ask on this medrash. So you put on tefillin, shtat yitzis Mitzrayim, shayches. But of course, this theory is based, and how exactly the Prutim shtel zechos, that's already, but the idea that the medrash is getting at is that tefillin is didn't happen in history. Tefillin is a nature. There's a reason why a human being should put on tefillin. Right? And of course, since we imagine him to be an ideal human being, he understood the mitzvah tefillin, like Shnei Yosef from Mesich Levad, without being mitzvah, right? Nobody thinks that he was mitzvah, but because he was Udam Hashulam, so he must have understood that. Put on tefillin and to eat Shabbos and to do a bris milah, of course, that's the big kasha on this shit. And just showing you how it's very easy to show, and that's why we.
That seems that it has a reality.
Yes. Right.
I was with my cat. The way that if he was able to do it beforehand, it must be that you could do it in different ways. I mean,
no, that's a third theory but that's already a prat in this theory, I think. In other words, of course, the kaila, if the details, you see, we always talk about this. That's why I said earlier that this question is sort of the same question. If the details of the mitzvahs are real, are the important part, it's not really the same thing. Because of course it could be true, and by the way, that's true in halacha also. I think that to some extent, some people take it way too far. To some extent, everyone agrees that the prutim are not ma'akiv. Every mitzvah has prutim that are not ma'akiv. The mitzvah la'akiv, right? Even in Kachim we have things like that. Everyone agrees that you don't have to do, even halachically. See, even after all the kviyas that halacha made, there's still different ways of doing the same mitzvah. And sometimes say it's ma'akiv mitzad minhag, that mitzad itzama thing. There's a lot of ways of doing things. And of course, if the reality would be different, then everyone is murdered that the halacha will have, the mitzvahs would change in that sense. That's a very small level of prat. And same thing, these theories that say, from the idea of the mitzvah, not the mitzvah, that you're already assuming that the ikar mitzvah is the idea. Of course, you could talk about that. You could sort of like be mishal of these two things and say that by Matan Torah, the rayified, like Bekaveh, the chiyuv, comes on the tzira, not on the misik, not on the. That could be, but these are really two ways of. You understand what I'm saying, or I'm confused? What I'm saying is that if mitzvahs, let's talk about Kedushas, right? If Kedushas Shabbos is a real thing, it's from Shesh Meberashis, that's another way of talking about it. It's a nature of the seventh day, that it's heilig. Whether because the Eibush was Shoyvis and Shesh Meberashis, whatever reason, it's heilig. Then Avram Avinu should have known about it. If not, it seems to be a chesur in Avram Avinu. Why doesn't Avram Avinu know about this Shabbos? We could talk about Goyim, by the way. We talked about sometimes Chazal seem to have tanas on the Goyim that they're not Mekabel the Torah, right? That they don't do the Torah. Why would the Goy do the Torah? He didn't get the mitzvah. Right? That it is because these are the correct things. These are not things that were created by the Torah. The Torah maybe was Megala then. Maybe you can even say maybe gave them a certain form that Mekan Vailich have to do it in that form. Beside there. But it didn't start there. It's a nature. And if you are a good philosopher of nature, if you know nature correctly, if you know the world correctly, you should know Shabbos. According to this theory, Matan Torah is not important. Yes, absolutely. There's people that actually take this theory. Again, this is right. We always get into these things. I try to make things clear where the difference is. You could always be mishal of everything, and that's where we are, where we got to where we are. But I'm trying to go back. There are actually shittas in Chazal and shittas in Meshayim even, and we could find them exactly, and that seem to not devalue Matan Torah. They don't think that the reason we do the Torah is because of Matan Torah. The reason we do the Torah is because these are the correct things. Maybe Matan Torah helps us by showing us, and maybe even gives us detailed ways of doing it. Say all these things, but they don't. If you ask them why, what's the shoyrish achiv, what's the shoyrish hamisik of the Shabbos, they don't say Matan Torah. They say Maaseh Bereshis. They say that because that's the nature of things. That's really what some people would say. Maybe even the Rambam, and some, I'm not getting into details. That's one way of saying it. Another way, if you ask the Shulchan Aruch, if you ask the Chachumim in general, why you do the Torah, they say because of Matan Torah, maybe because of Hudik Abliyo, wherever it was, from some act of Matan Torah, not because this is the correct thing to do, not because this is the. Of course, there's details. Everyone is more that talking about Shabbos is a good example because nobody thinks that it's a moral thing, right? Makes sense. And I asked some people, and I think there's some conflict even in the liturgy and the Nizach HaTfilah. You could see them waffling back and forth if we keep Shabbos because of Matan Torah, because of Maaseh Bereshis, Tziyas Mitzrayim. There's a lot of. These are two ways of thinking about it.
Even if you keep it.
Ich verstehe, this is all illustration. Every time.
How do we get included in it? If the bunch show us that's
again, we could get into detail. Everything we could try to. I'm just giving this is only illustration, like I said in the beginning. You could make it Sai Masprat, and then you could say that it's Machadash Epsaprat, or it's more of a connection to us, like you're saying, or we could say we could think of 10 different theories. But I'm just using this as an illustration, just to have it in my mind, a way to talk about things. That's what I'm saying. It's somewhat it's a drish, but it's also true. And if you associate these things, if the mitzvahs, if the Kedushas, let's not talk about mitzvahs. If Kedushas Shabbos is something inherent, if Kedushas Shabbos lives in the day, then it's from Maaseh Bereshis. Of course, it's not mechrech. It could be it's in the day and it happened later. You could say everything. I'm just giving it a way of thinking within language of Torah. That's all. Don't really need this, and you could be cholik on it. But I'm just giving you a way of thinking about it. If it's otherwise, then we generally think of mitzvahs as starting from Matan Torah, as being a sort of whatever. That's how the other way of thinking is. Okay. Of course, you're gonna see that everything you could be mahapich. I'm just using this as an illustration to have a tfisa and what I'm talking about, right? Lamasa, the Mendel Kasha does try to connect this. That's sort of where I got this language of Matan Torah before Matan Torah, but I think that he's getting at a true idea. So now, let me just go back to what I'm saying. So these are very generally two. 1 second. So stimmt. Okay, another way. So the one person thinks that another way is that the kedusha doesn't start. It's not. Doesn't exist in the thing. It doesn't start from being some sort of natural thing. It starts from. It starts from. Again, you could say it's tuli and the. There's really two ways of saying this. That's what I was saying last week. There's two ways of saying this, and we have to remember these two ways. I could show you another nice example for these two ways, or more than one nice example. Now, the two ways of saying the other thing is, so the first shita, and we have to be very clear, because it's very extreme with the first shita. According to the first shita, theoretically, again, you might need the right telescope to find the kedusha. I don't know what kind of reich, kodesh, or nefiyah you need, but theoretically, it's not. This is very tricky because I'm saying it's a revelation shita, but it's not really revelation in the sense that we talk about usually revelation versus logic, right? Because this is really a scientific theory of the Torah. Torah is some sort of science. In other words, it's about finding the truth of the nature, maybe the spiritual nature. It doesn't matter which level of nature, right? But it's truly in the reality, and the Torah is just a way of knowing it. And of course, you could say nobody knows it besides the Torah. You could say all these kinds of things. But in the end of the day, what's kavaya is the reality. Another way of showing the nafkamina would be that a shoygig doesn't help, right? Good intentions don't help. This is the Kizri's biggest thing. Good intentions are not enough, right? And you realize that the Kizri, although he's generally presented as being the one that has the anti-philosophical theory, the one that says the Torah is revelation and not science, he's really the biggest scientist of the Torah, in this sense. Because he, according to everyone else, everyone that thinks of the Torah as a more kind of relational thing, it's a relationship between you and God, a bris, something like that, can't accept what the Kizri says, that no matter how many thousand years of Gnavut Kavuna, you're never going to get to God. That sounds crazy, because that assumes a sort of evil God, right? If you think about it. Lefim Tzara Agra, the Kizri is cholik on Lefim Tzara Agra. At least in this sense, we could find some statement which is true, right? This Melech Kizer, of course, it's complicated. I'm just trying to sharpen the difference. The Melech Kizer had gedient der Rebbeinu Shalom be Chaifetz Lev, not der Rebbeinu Shalom, because he had a mistake with the Zura. But it's worthless. He had okay, Baruch Hashem, there was a Malach that helped him. But if he would have not got that Malach, he would never go to Gan Eden. He would never get to Shlaimus. He would never get anywhere. In other words, he would never touch God. In the Kizzi's language, he would never get a Shiraz HaShechina, right? He would never touch the Inyan Elihi, the Dover Elihi, or you want to translate it. Never happened. This way of this thinking is extremely scientific, right? Science holds like this, right? In science, there's no try. There's only either it works, right? If the car either it turns on because you put the key correctly, or the willst and the minds and you have a Messiah, it doesn't help. It's useless, right? Atam afil shagim doesn't work on the Kizri's theory. Never could work. Right? You have to be mechavner lemes. If you're not mechavner lemes, then when you have fullest sympathy, maybe even God has sympathy with you at some level, but it's just not. You're not going to be there. It's just not going to work.
Let me ask you a question. I thought you asked is it Kuzri saying now like is a fact, or maybe he's just saying it has to come from you can't figure out what English wants.
No, he very explicitly has as far as I'm reading him, again, you could be chaylik. He very explicitly has the theory that it's a fact, and he also has the theory that it's very hard to find out these facts. He does sort of agree, he doesn't get to the details of it, that people might have some parts of the facts right and things like that. But he definitely thinks that it's only about getting the right keys. That's his whole thing.
Because the Rosh Hashana was both in Yerushalayim. For whatever reason, he was both.
He doesn't talk about boicha.
No, I'm saying
That's what Sefet Vurim says. That's not what the Kizri says.
I don't mean that way. He decided he's going through Yerushalayim. So you decide you want to serve him through Mecca. So he said he doesn't make a difference. The Rosh Hashana he wants to do it there. Not that. No,
that's not the Kizri's theory. I want to be very clear. As far as I can read him, this is my reading. That would be a Litvish theory. The Rebbeinu Shalom decided, and therefore you can't go against his roots, and everything is about his roots. And sometimes people read the Kizri this way. I don't read him this way, not today. At least forget about if it was the Kizri. There is such a theory. I think it's the McWilliams theory generally, in some sense. The McWilliams are just an elaboration of the Kizri in a lot of ways. The Kizri definitely holds that you could make mistakes and you're going to get nowhere. Not because if you talk about the roots in Hashem, then Tanas Shoygik should be a good Tana. Tanas Oinus at least. Shoygik could say Hoyle Lilmud. What's Betanas Oinus? This is a very serious question, by the way. It's a very serious question for interreligious, right? Rosh Leibim Biro very famously in Keser Malchus said that everyone, right, very famously says in Keser Malchus that Oved Zura are also Oved Hashem. Just have a sort of mistake, but I forgot the language. He gives a mushal. It's like we very much understand. He says That's what it says in Malachi also. And the Kizri would not agree with that, because the Kizri, the whole vart of Torah is not to be oid mechavan lavadas Hashem. That's easy. That's what he usually describes as the philosophical religion. That is not the philosophical. It's the one that Pinkt has the right way to get to it. He knows the right signs, or like his mushal of the pharmacist. He knows the right refias. Not that he wants to get healthy. Everyone wants to get healthy. But you have the right way to do it. And this is based on there being some right way. Now, of course, you could start arguing in a deeper level, does the right way decided by God? Of course, ultimately it's decided by God. But it doesn't work in the way that doesn't work in the roots in the way it actually works in a systematic way. Because otherwise, why would he be against God being mashres schema and by a guy? He ultimately has a scientific theory of things, not a Rutsen theory of things. the only ones that stay with a pure Rutsen theory are like the Halacha people. Like I keep on getting at this, right? But nobody in Jewish theology almost has a real Rutsen theory, which is like the biblical theory of God could do whatever He wants. Maybe some people do. I'm not getting maybe the Kreskas Chaysh. And then let's go back to this. Okay, this is you understand that it's not big enough community. If Tanas Oynes Shoigig is worth anything, you could say not in a moral sense, in a getting to God sense, right? In a theological sense. According to the Kizri, according to this Shitta number 1, that it's a reality, it's useless. Maybe God will have Rachmunis on you, will send you a Novi and tell you the right answer. Maybe that's the way it would work. That's why it would reconcile the seeming to be a moral imperative to not let people have mistakes and decide. But until you're not going to get the right way, it's not going to happen. Right? That's theory number 1, and that's the Kizri's theory. I do think, like I said, this theory is also, just to be clear, this theory has the problem of being somewhat against the Torah, right? You can't say that this is a very Torah-like theory, because generally, again, against the Torah in a sort of traditional rabbinic sense, where the Torah is number 1, Ma'amad Ar Sinai, and number 2, Chachamim. 2 very important moments, Torah Bek 7, Torah Bek Peh, for Chachamim, for the rabbinical general. Again, you have to speak sources for these kind of things. But the impression that you get from learning Talmud, from learning the Gemara, is not that they're trying to find out the truth of where the holiness is. We don't get this impression. We definitely get the impression, especially if you read Kachim. If you read Halachic, Kachim is one of the most radical studim in this sense, because Kachim is literally about getting to God. And they don't even pretend to say we can only do the Messiah because we don't know how to actually get the slich of the carbon going. They don't even pretend to say this Chikah Torah is mostly Torah and Dreshes, which is Kachim is based on very much, and we're going to dash in the Torah and we're going to decide when you bring this carbon, which way to be makriv it and so on. And they don't even seem to be worried about making a mistake. You see, if you believe.
Again, it could be the same thing before. It's different ways of getting to their reality.
Yes, but they're not worried. They don't have this daga that we're making a mistake. They don't seem to be worried about making mistakes. They don't seem to be worried about the problem of what if. Let me just paint the problem. What if the haskumas chachamim was that they make kamachatas in this way, and the truth turns out to be that you don't make it in this way? Nebuch the seed is not going to ever go to Gan Eden. They never have. They didn't even raise in the whole side of the culture. Nobody raises a question that's even like a first cousin of this question. We have to get how serious this is. Maybe they do. Maybe I'm making a mistake. I say broad statements. Maybe you could find someone that does. It's hard because before you open your eyes to that this question should exist, you don't realize. Maybe the Gemara does ask this question. I'm not sure. But in my impression is that the whole side of the Mishnah never worries about this question. I talked about the Shuna last week, right? The Gemara is never worried. When the thing going to happen? They don't seem to be worried about this at all. They just don't ask this question. They totally assume that that the Torah is not a science of discovering the truth. They assume that the Torah is truth is given to us in a certain sense. In other words, there's some real way in which it starts by us. It starts by the Chumam being Machriya, in whichever way. That's my impression. You could be chaylik on this. Yes. You could, again, I'm not looking for ways to reconcile things. I'm looking for ways to sharpen differences. You could always reconcile everything, but if we have to understand why these are two malachim that don't clash, B'shitchias, again, you could always, I'm going to say this is one of my whole shit, and everything is like this. Yes, everything can be reconciled, the oimek, and sometimes this sort of historically what happened in certain senses, right? First in the Rishonim you have these machlokes, and then you saw people saying, but me can be yashiv, and then you forget that this is a doichik teretz to be yashiv, a big problem. Thousands of examples in this. Right, because the whole Odom HaMachshov and the Achronim is a bunch of doichik, like duct tape taritzim, of connecting opposite theories. And I'm trying to get back to the Pashtes. And maybe and ultimately we have to adapt one of these Shalivim, just trying to understand what we have to be Miyashiv, and where this thought. Another example, just because I'm talking about this. Another very basic example is the question of science, right? The basic question of science, and you have to realize this is serious, right? For example, I'll give you an example because I was reading the Chaznish read a book, and apparently it was this Italian Yid, I forgot his name, that wrote a book about Rosh Hashana and astronomy and stuff like that. That book says that it's this. I printed it out, so let me see. The handtaker people. No, he doesn't quote him, but it's printed as a guas on it, and then they thought it was on Tikachinsky's book, but it doesn't really make sense. And then they found that it looks like that it's a guas on this book. It's called. It doesn't say his name is because it's not from Metaphysical. Metaphysical doesn't have the book. It's in Google. Maybe they hold like Chaznish. He looks like Vias Tagel Tamtrochen. I don't know if he was Grest Tamtrochen. I forgot his name. Moshe something. I'll tell you why I got to this book. But Bekitzer, no. He's not famous. Unknown person. I don't remember the name. Okay. It's called Mucha Chodesh. The Sefer is called Mucha Chodesh. And his name was Reb Moshe something, Moshe Chest, the name is Mucha Chodesh. And he says, for example, in very sharp way terms, that this is the thing that Chaznish was mad at, that all the Rishonim talking about the dateline seem to assume that there's only one side of the world, and since they were obviously wrong, so we don't have halacha. That's what he says. We can't use them. And then he goes on to talk about the shkia also. I think he just means to be machriya connected by the tam. Someone said he's being cholek b'chazal. It's not really being cholek by the tam. He says everyone knows that since we know there's the other side of the world, so we can't assume that by the tam Chazal's theory of the sun going into the sky. So mashkia is like the shit segoyim. Now the Chaznish makes a goy, says this is not even a serious question because it's katnister god malay, sometimes is our language. Now, of course, you could say this is because, but you can't really say that is stupidity. This is the reasonable thing. If a normal person, before we know a lot of teritzim on this, and the Chaznish itself is based on a teretz to this. I'll get to this maybe if we get to it, but we know a lot of teritzim. The Chum say that a kid is like this and they know the signs of this, but they didn't mean that. They meant berachnes, they meant bechina, they meant it looks like that. We have 5 different teritzim, and everyone sort of bought into one of these teritzim. Ad kedekach that you forgot that not any normal person would say, okay, this is wrong. You forgot that the first time, in other words, historically, we could show this. The first time people asked this question, there were two camps. One side said, were wrong, and some of them, like the Rambam describes in a few places, the 3 kithis of people that read that good at Chazal, right? One people say, okay, Chazal were crazy. Not crazy, they didn't know. Okay, I'm not getting it. Some people were mzalzlan, the Chum, they say, okay, therefore we're going to become Goyim. Other people say, they don't have to become Goyim, they just did work with what they had, and since we don't know that's wrong, then the Pashtas Halacha should change. That's the normal reaction. Some other people say, we're not allowed to believe their signs. That's the 2 normal reactions. Then comes some tife, let's say, we could reconcile these 2 sides by some fancy theory. But you have to read that this fancy theory is a chiddush like Kusav B'Torah. You made it up because you're so bothered by not being going to fall into one of these 2 sides. I understand you. But you're also losing a certain yashres. You're forgetting that any normal person, if you come to him with this question, and actually the first time people came to this question, that was the 2 reactions that you had. Either yes, obviously we can't pass the halacha like this because it's false, or you say, I'm just going to close my eyes and deny reality. That's the really 2 normal reactions. The straight reactions, the yashristic reactions are this. All these fancy people are very good, but you can't assume that someone that doesn't take these fancy people, doesn't assume this is meshigis, that's typish. It's not a typish, he's just showing you what, you understand my mushal? And this is the mushal for Kol HaTorah. Everything is like this. Yes, you could fa'am for everything. But Kodim, what's the first thought they had? And actually people, the first time were at the thought they had. Now you could say they can fa'am. Beside F Shekar, F Shenish. But that's the back where I am. So that's shit number 1. Now,
originally always understood one way. Then when we see
Ich verstehe that. It could be that we have reasons to reinterpret it, but you don't really have the right to go on and say that the person that says the normal teretz is crazy. He's not crazy. I understand that you could say it, but if you say, by the way, the Chazanish never has the straightness of even saying that. He doesn't say you're right. In the Kivas Hashanim we read it like this, but since we know that we can't, and we still assume it to contain some truth, so we have to reread it in a not less literal way. If you would say that, that's what the Rambam says basically. When these people say, the Chazanish never says that. He always metashtish this reality that we used to not understand it this way. In other words, the simple pshat is not like this. This is true in so many different areas that I can't even start to count. And this is what leads people to get totally confused. Even if the taritzim are true, you lose the way of clarifying a sigga, you understand? I'm not looking for deciding what's true so much. I'm looking for have some clarity, what's going on. Look at the date line, what's going on? And the Chanish is denying that there's even a tzad that anyone ever didn't know that there's a America. I don't know why he has to deny it. Why can't you? In other words, everyone agrees that some people didn't know. Let's talk from the perspective of those people. People get so bought into their teritzim that miyashiv everything somehow that they forget that you lose the ability to talk with him. In other words, you can't even talk to Chazanish. Does your teretz, does your mahalach that's trying to transcend the problem, does it actually answer the problem? You know, you can't even talk to him because he pretends that this was always the pshat. Because he doesn't want to say this. Yeah, like you're saying. Yes, we thought like this, but now we can't think like this. So we have to sort of push it into the new paradigm. Then I would have who to talk to, and that's what some people interpret Chazanish like this. But one of the reasons it's so hard to talk with anyone is because nobody even says this. Back to where I am. So that's one theory. Now the second theory is the opposite theory. Right? Let's just try to, because I want to try to clarify the second theory, and I said it last week also. The second theory says, of course, some things are reality, but let's talk about the things like Tisha Shabbos is a good example, because it's obviously not literally. The second theory says, and there's two ways of saying the second theory. We have to very clearly sort of understand both of them. I really understand one, but the second theory would say, like we say, whatever the opposite of realism is there's actually, even in philosophy, there's different antidotes to realism. But generally would say some kind of nominalism, right? That's generally what says to be the opposite of realism. Nominalism in the sense, these things exist in your mind, not in the world, right? Or in other words, we could say it's a haskuma. It's not mechrich to say haskuma. In other words, to say that it exists in your mind is not the same as saying it's arbitrary. It could be it exists in your mind, and that's the way your mind must understand. That's Kant's theory, right? That's the way your mind, more or less, if I understand, the way your mind must understand the world. So it's really part of the world in the sense of being, it's a law in your mind and not on your world, not on the world, right? Something like that. And we could say,
now your mind understanding reality, reality has to be according to your mind, something like that.
That's already a radical way of saying it. You could say it's simple. Your mind, it's not arbitrary that we think in certain ways. That's how God created the mind. It's not subjective. It's not fake. That's why subjective doesn't mean fake. It just means, in other words, we could say, and that's why you could also have mistakes in this. So that's where it gets complicated. But let's just say, in the simple way of saying is that Shabbos is something. What was my example that I was thinking of? I'll show you why it's a little more complicated. I'll give you another example. Shabbos is something that the Chachomim make, or the Torah makes, but not in the sense of describing reality. When the Olam Elyonim is Shabbos, it's a thing. We arbeit 6 Tage, arbeit Shabbos. And which day is Shabbos? When we Shabbos, that's when it's Shabbos. Right? That's the other way of thinking. Right? Or I gave the example last week of the din. That's a very good example. Right? When is the din Rosh Hashana? There's no din Rosh Hashana. In other words, the din happens, or there is a din, but it happens when we say that it happens. That was the Medi's reading of the Ma'amar, Ein Bezen Shel Mal Nechnusim Adin, Elim Kein Bezen Shel Mata Nechnusim. Or we could say, that's Shittu number one, that's the rationalist. The Rishonim very clearly say this. Again, you could always, that's what I'm getting to. You could always make this, that we very clearly say that there is no din, Rosh Hashana. Nothing actually happens. If there would be no Yidden to make Rosh Hashana, there would be no Rosh Hashana. Now that there are Yidden in the human world, in Olam Hazeh, there's Rosh Hashana in your mind, and it's very real. I'm not saying they are also all, you should do tshiva, you should cry, you should blush, but it's not, there's no question of what happens to Olam Hazeh. There's no Olam Hazeh in this sense, right? There isn't. Okay, the Bechlal there isn't, but you could say it doesn't, even if it is, it's no, there isn't. No, there isn't. There isn't. That's very clear, there isn't. There is a din, there's a concept of din. Of course, there's a concept of din, there's a concept of schar v'onish, but that's every week. Why we make a Isaac of it today is because people live in time, but they need time to think about certain things. And next week we'll think about Simcha, not because there's a Psasgila in this time or something in the reality that makes this the time of Simcha, just because that's what the Torah organized. If the Torah would have organized it a different way, it would have been legitimate too. That's another nafkamina, right? And that's why the Chum do have the right to organize it in a different way. So this is where it's very clearly a nafkamina. According to this theory, the Chum have a lot more real power.
There is no din. I hear what you're saying. There is no din according to this.
There's no din in time. Not there's no din. There's no din in time. The din doesn't happen in a certain day.
It's a time of seeing time or ever.
No, ever.
Like, you're
Of course, it has to happen in time. When you get the punishment or whatever, it happens in time. But
not only is totally in us. It's more like
right, that's what I'm trying to disambiguate these two mivunim of the second shot.
yeah.
One shot is that there is nothing. There is only us. There is only us. That's what the Rishonim, the Rambam's Chassidim said. Very clear. There is only us. And they said this about the din of Shuna. I'm pretty sure that they would say this about every Kol HaTorah killer. And to some extent, they say this. Right? In other words, if you ask, and this is very important, if you ask the question, you could ask the question like this, right? Who gave, again, I took the Mishnah Shuna said this question. Who gave the Chacham the right to change the date of Me'adim? How could you do such a thing? This is a question that actually was sort of asked by the Chacham. Because this is one of the very clear places where they show their power over the Torah. So there's two different teretzim to this, or three. The same three teretzim, right? The one teretz, in the Kidder's way of thinking, this is a real question. And by the Rishonim days, there was this real question because the Karum were going around having tanas on this. And there's times of Chazal the same also wherever the Bais they were having tanas on this. And it's always one of the big tanas that people had in the Chachamim. Why is this a place to have tanas? No, there's other reasons, but this is one of the reasons. Why is this the Chasad Iber? There's a whole the Bais are being mechanical and Titus. Well, again, why is this so important? Of course, it's important who gets to decide. Do we decide, or does the guy in Shomron decide it? But more deeply, there's a reason why people get so hung up on this. Like it says in the Mishnah with Rabbi Shia, right? Yom Kippur that's why Yom Kippur is the example. Why doesn't he talk about Sikkos? There's a reason why he talks about Yom Kippur. Mishnah, right? Rabbi Shia and Gamliel. The reason is because Yom Kippur is Yom Kippur, but in Shalom. Either the Eibush is Mechel Da'avonis on this day or on the next day. It's a very real thing, Yom Kippur. Probably the most real thing in the Jewish calendar. Real in the theological sense, right? And the Chacham will come and they might have made a mistake, or they might have, for some reason, they decided that it's on test. It's on test Tishre. This is crazy, right? And this is really the reason why the people, and of course the Karum, they have a lot of machlokes with the Chacham, but very few of them are so. Of course, there's another reason, because it's a communal thing, so we have to come to this Mikdash, whatever, we have to decide, we have to all agree what Yom Kippur is. It's more important to agree what the date is than to agree if something is Kushra or Traif, right? That's the social reason for this. But there's also a theological reason for this. Because you're moving around God. If the real Pesach is a different day, then you people are not having Pesach. Not that you're over on an Isser of eating something that's Chaylev and I say it's Shimon. You're just not having Pesach. Pesach is Pesach Lashem. It's not Pesach von ins. It has to touch God in some sense. If going there with Mikdash, and Makrev the Korban Pesach, Korban Yom Kippur, that's Moich Lavanas. And if you do it the wrong day, it doesn't work. You pass this. And it's true if you do it the wrong day in Halacha, it doesn't work, right? If you make Yom Kippur and Piram, it's not going to work. Everyone agrees on this in a certain level, right? And this is why this is such a fraught question. What's the Sada Iber? How do you know, right? And Rabbi Akiva, and this must be a huge radical chiddush of Rabbi Akiva, and of course. And Rabbi Akiva really comes and says, I don't care. And there's two teretzim. You have to understand there's two teretzim. And Rishonim you could see two ways. There's one way of answering this question, which is to say, you people are crazy, the Chum have the right, the Rav Sadiq and other people, they try to answer in this way. No, the Chum always went, once said they always went to the Cheshb and so on, right? This is one of the big enough communities, right? Rav Sadiq went to about the Kiddush HaChodesh. In other words, we always knew the right answer to the question, when is Rosh Chodesh? You have tanas, you're just making a mistake. You're astronomically wrong, right? This is a very good example because everyone is moided that at least theoretically the chodesh is tuli in something very real, right? I'm talking about olam hazeh, whatever olam Hashem didn't call it olam hazeh, right? They call it olam hagalgalim. In the olam hakechovim, the olam harirayich, that's what's kavarish chodesh. That's halacha. Everyone agrees with this halacha, at least most people. And then now we have to, since we're humans, we have to discern when is taka de levuna, when is the moiled. It's not obvious. If it would be obvious, there wouldn't be questions. But it's not obvious, right? So now, how do we decide? How worried do we have to be that we're deciding correctly? This is really the question. According to Rabbi Yishiya's Havamina, if I think that Galil decided incorrectly, then he's not having the wrong Yom Kippur. I have to fast a different day. That was his Havamina. He's just wrong. You didn't see Levuna. He was some shit guy. He knows astronomy better than you. The Levuna never was there. There was no Levuna. There was no Levuna. And therefore, the only way to answer this would be to say that, no, we do have the right cheshbon. And the reason why we're greater than you is because we have the right cheshbon, we have the wrong cheshbon. And this is literally the Shainim. I think the Kizri is pretty much on this side. I'll get to, he is a little more complicated. He talks about this question, about Kiddush Chodesh, about Pesach. The other way, the Bakiva's way, is really not this. And Bakiva says something crazy. He says, I don't care. The Bakiva made a new drusha, right? It doesn't say that he was Makabal this drusha, right? One of the very... He made a drusha, it says, Ashdikri Oysam, and he said we could read it at them, because no Nikidis in the Torah. Doesn't, even as the Pusset that he makes the drusha on doesn't exist, right? It's based on an idea. Yes, I'm make it. We can line and we could read it differently than the Nikidis, than the Messiah of the Nikidis, and pretend it says Atem, and Atem, Afil Shagim, Atem Afil Mazidin, the Chodesh, the Kiddush is a Chodesh is Chal, and you don't have to be worried. If you have to be worried, then he has a good argument. Because if you have the word, then Butel Kol HaTorah Kille. Guys, Abudik, Achakol Bezen, Shohim, Isman Moshe Rabbeinu. Who do we know? Do we have anyone? Do we have any proof that they were always right? No, we don't have proof that they were always right.
I'm just asking because I always thought of this. Could you say there's a teva that it's telling other people?
I'm getting at the teva. A minute. That's the third shitta. I'm up to the second shitta because I think that Rabbi Kiva is pretty clearly in the second shitta. He says because Rabbi Kiva could have said, if you tell someone you have to be boidik after every bezen, we must Moshe. Right. What do you mean you have to be boidik? We have a minasachom. Every bezen was right. But Rabbi Kiva tanning. His tanning is that no, we don't have any guarantee that we're always right. How do you know? Maybe they were pinked up yiftach. How do you even know that they were always right? This is a very radical thing, see?
Why is the point that everyone's always right because it's telling him that?
I don't know, it's a good question. I don't think it could be that he thinks that the whole Iber, not the Iber HaChodesh, but Iber HaShunu could be totally wrong. We could be in the wrong month or in the wrong year. But I don't know if we could be in the wrong, because after a month the Lachir goes back. I don't know exactly why he thinks, but maybe he thinks general, maybe he's taking a general argument about Kol HaTorah Killa. I'm not sure. It's a good. I thought about this. I didn't look in the Mefarshim if they talk. I'm sure they talk about it. If it's taken after minute to us that they were Torah or not. But the Master is saying this, saying you don't have any guarantee that all the Besudim were right. And this is the Torah being Mekayim. Elamai, I'm not asking in the Torah. Shtikri oisam, the Torah was given to you, like the Gemara says, Msochim Yisrael, the Kachenel is Manim. This is a very radical Gemara. Because Manim is, when they say Yisrael, Shemachriim, and Chaylev or Shimon, they said at the time, it was Navzam B'chodesh, Ashvi, Bechel Chodesh, as the Yisrael make it. No, we say Mekadosh was Manim. What I mean to say is, Nechom decided that today is Aleph Tishra. Right?
Why is different Shimon and Chaylev also in the
No, Shimon and Chaylev, it's easier to understand. It's also, again, everything is also in the Kizri's theory. But at least it's easier to understand that it's not a Matzis, but Ilam Azel, that's something like this. Time is almost, and of course this is a little more complicated. We'll get to the Chaznish in a minute about the timeline. If we'll get to it. I understand, no, Shimon and Chaylev is a halachic difference. It's not a real, at least, okay, we can be ma'ayin, and let's assume that it's a halachic difference. It's not a different kind of Chaylev. It's just this shtickle is mit, this shtickle is also. So the Chum decide which shtickle. It's not saying it's a different day. It's like you Chum say, and today is Tuesday. It's not, it's Sunday. You say, no, if I say it's Tuesday, it becomes Tuesday. That's really what they think. Of course, but it's not a real difference. I'm just saying that in the language is very much clear. He says today is Sunday, and today is Tuesday. It's Sunday, Tuesday. It's whatever I say it is. Then you're saying that there's no reality behind it. We don't care. Maybe there is, but we don't care about it. Or I'm not kind in the Torah. However you exactly theorize it. And Atam Efel Shag, and he made a drusha. Literally, there's like drusha itself is koyach chacham to make drushas, right? It doesn't really say in the Torah Atam Efel Shag. Rabbi Kiva said that it says, right? So everything starts and ends with Rabbi Kiva.
The Torah was given that way.
Ich verstehe, but who said? Like the Ramban, who said the Torah was given to Chum? The Chum said, right? Remember the Ramban and Shodesh? The Chum are the ones that said that we have to listen to the Chum, right? So you can't say that the Torah, it doesn't really work to say that the Torah said. The Rambam tries to do that, but it doesn't really work.
The Torah also.
Exactly. So everything is the Chum. The Rambam tries to make the Chum also a mitzvah, because the Rambam is much more on the side, at least, okay, we could try to reckon this all. But in that mitzvah, right, the Chum are the ones that say that we can make drushas and change halachas and do things. So now, okay, so this is second theory, and again, this is what they say clearly, and I'll give you another example, third example, which is the famous Yerushalmi about the Basila, Psalei al-Chazrim, Yerushalmi in Yehomis, I think, right? It's brought in the Maggid Mishnah in the Chassidus, that there's a shir, and the Rambam says, based on also, that's the Rambam took this from the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi says that the 3 years of the of the girl is not 3 years mesles, it's 3 years calendar years, right? It's itself a chiddush. We could have said that that's 300 whatever amount of days, because that's how it works, right? Kim the Rishalmi says no, we count it like the calendar, right? Ask someone in the Rishalmi, I forgot who, and was the reality follow guide to that calendar. The Rishalmi asked this question. It doesn't say. Someone asked the question. How does this work? And if you have the chshuna, then it's going to be back. How is it supposed to work? And the Rishalmi says, "I'll go in the line." I don't remember the language of the Rishalmi. Okay, now I do know what the Rishonim say about this. And we can be like what the Rishalmi himself meant. I'm not sure what the pshat of the Rishalmi is, but at least the Maggid Mishnah brings us in Chassidus, and he says the Rishalmi is obviously saying that it's not impossible. Of course, the Silim don't work according to the calendar, but he says the thing is that Mishpat Torah Anum Kfiyah Seichel. That's the language of the Maggid Mishnah. But really, what he means to say is that the halacha is kavaya danuga in this way, although it doesn't correspond to reality. And almanas kan in the Torah. That's the second thing. The Mishnah almost clearly says this. Not clearly. He clearly says this. And there's no other way to read the Maggid Mishnah. He says that the Torah was given that we should decide. And he can ask the Chum, why the Chum say this? Probably because it's easier to reckon, right? But that's how we make your birthday. Halacha your birthday and so. And I is the fact. We don't care about the fact. Right, exactly. And I is the fact. The basilim are there or not there. Who cares about the basilim? Since when are we about the reality? We're about the Torah. We're about making rules, and we have the right to make the rules. The Chacham, whatever logic guides them, and so. Exactly. And now, of course, you go even deeper. That's why I'm going to get to the third theory. But this is the one simple thing that he says. We don't care about her actual basilim. This halacha was not. Of course, it's also about her actual basilim, but when you get to these limits, it's not about the actual basilim. It's about the halacha. And as for the Torah, is it true? It's not true. No. So we have even a medrash that says the Eibishter is maskim to whatever we say. In other words, that's how the Torah works, right? So that's theory number 2. Okay. That's like again. That's the first. Well, so let's. That's the second theory. I'm just giving you an example. You could in all these examples, you see that you could do in the third theory. Now, the third theory, and this is what I'm trying to differentiate. And you have to clearly. I'm going to see a fourth theory now. I'm thinking that we have to make a fourth theory. The third theory is. The third theory is something like this. It's the way a lot of Achronim quote this Maggid Mishnah, and for some weird reason they didn't think through what they're saying, because I don't understand how anyone could say this seriously. And it's brought in a lot of places. We have to look up who actually started this mistake or this weird reading. But many Achronim read. Yeah, I verstehe. No, I think it's Ramoshe Chag is the earliest Achron I found saying this is Ramoshe Chag is. Ramoshe Chag is quotes it like this. But he's also not clear that he means this. I have it here. He talks about this whole he connects it to this sigya about the Shabbos and so on. And they quote the Rishalmi as if this kasha that the Rishalmi says they quote it as a chief and not as a kasha. They just miss. I think at least the Maggid Mishnah, we could look in the Rishalmi. The way the Maggid Mishnah quotes this is a kasha. Does the psilim come back? Of course not. Elamai navateret. And they quote it as if the Rishalmi is saying this is not a kasha and also teretz. Yeah. Now magic happens. A nest happens every year. Every time there's a kiddush, there's a nest. That the basilim work like this. A nest tmidi, right? And whoever, I don't understand how anyone ever thought take this seriously, because come on. You really think that the nest happened, like seriously, we should flag up all the atheists. Man, this is such a nest nigla. Man, is this. And it's not, they always quote it in the extreme case where the Rishalmi maybe means, let's say it was Choftes Adar, and then we're Mabed Chodesh, should go back. But we don't even need that extreme case. We could stamazay check every time. If something changes by 3 years, does it change according to the Yiddish calendar or according to the Goyish calendar? There's a difference of 11 days or whatever. We don't even need to understand. It's mamash a nest nigla that happens every week. That's really what you think. I don't understand how anyone could. I don't think they themselves meant this. It doesn't make sense. That's how much it means this. With the treife, yeah. That mazas tama moifes, man. That's taka moifes. Man, doesn't really work. Nobody really thinks. Kids name there's no whatever. Can't you say that? Whatever. Kids name is da loch stimmt nicht. Kids name is da loch stimmt nicht. Kids name is da loch stimmt nicht. Like you're saying, you have to be it's whatever. Also, the Rambam holds that treifes bei Udem are not the same. It's not. It stimmt nicht die ganze Sache. Treifes bei Udem are not lefi treifes bei him. That's not true. This whole thing. Halachically, the Rambam says beferish, and there might be a chnem that are cholik, but I can't get into this. But I could Yes, of course. Of course, nobody believes this. Do you really does? I don't know. I don't understand why people go around saying things that they don't believe. There's a nest. Why don't we? We should. Nachamol. If it's ruchnis, then you didn't say anything. The halacha is not about the ruchnis. It's an halachas neder. We some people think that the Vesta Chodesh is based on this. There's a shach or something. Because there's a Vesta according to the Levuna and shachas. And if the Ma'abed Chodesh, we go according to the Yiddish date, not according to the actual Levuna. If one of the Vestas that have to be Chodesh for is according to the date in the Chodesh, then sometimes the Bezin decides that they throw the Cheshm, whatever it is, but it's not based on realities. Even if you say that the Vest somehow cares about the Levuna, it definitely doesn't care naturally about what the Bezin says. And if Imkal Zeh, the fear of Paskim, it goes according to the... And that's what some Achradim say, La'al Goyim Relay. Yeah, now of course, could you check? Of course, Silchas Vestas were divorced from reality a long time ago, so I don't know, nobody even thinks that we should check. But do you really think that the reality is like this? I don't understand. That's at least, but when...
Why can't you think the reality?
Because go check, Rebbeinu Shalom, it's so easy to check. It's not like we're talking about some Durim Nesturim. I'm in it.
It's a very hard thing, what do you mean? I mean, why each person just check?
Vest is not hard to check. Everyone knows what it is. Of course, the whole Vestas are anyways because but that's the problem. You see, this is why you're marchik adisa. Okay, in theory, nobody believes that. You can't believe it. Of course, in reality, it's hard to check. So you just said that you don't believe the reality is like this. Because it's hard to check. So it's hard to check. So it's just a klal over some fuzziness of the reality. Then you're back to a different theory. That's the fourth theory that I want to get to. Right. So there's a third theory. According to such a theory that says God changes the reality. According to this. Now, of course, by the Basilim, it's a silly theory. I don't think anyone believes. Again, it's hard for me to believe that someone believes this literally. I think that what they mean is something different. Or maybe they do. Again, of course, I'm sure some people do. They keep on saying it, but like seriously, that's what you think. Kapone.
The reason why I'm saying that they don't believe is because it's a nest. That's what he's saying. It's a nest.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. So you're saying people believe in this happening all the time. They go, whatever. I don't know. The halacha should be based on a nest that we're not saying. It's not. It's very problematic.
They say that the Torah has like a creative. The Torah has a creative.
Ich verstehe. So you're saying that it's if you masber it berachnis, then you're not saying the reality. If it's I don't care how the logic of it is, how it works. Does this happen or not? Let's go check. Let's ask the doctors, or let's ask the app that tracks the periods if they see that. So, it's not hard to find statistics on this. There's goyish apps that track periods also. Come on, this is not real. No, I don't know. I'm sorry. This is real. But about Shabbos, I could believe that it's real. You see? Although the Kizri probably can't. This is why it's a problem. But I'm getting to this, right? Yeah. Things that I don't see, then it's not. It's a good. Actually, I don't. Now I'm thinking about it. I shouldn't be able to believe that it's real. It's real. It's easy because nobody sees. No. So let's try to think. Let's try to think like this. No, you're saying that I'm just fooling myself. Because I was gonna say that. At least like Abba the Din, let's go back to our Din Rosh Hashana. This is I think that's the practice of the Chazal, not like the Meiri says. That sounds like a very out of not pshat. Right? I said this last week. I don't think the Chacham that they say that the Bezdin Shel Ma'ale comes after the Bezdin Shel Ma'ale are saying that there's no Bezdin Shel Ma'ale. Like, come on. That's not what they believe. The Chacham definitely believe there's a Bezdin Shel Ma'ale, and actually know that the Bezdin Shel Ma'ale is made up of Maluchim. I already researched this last week. There's a Bezdin Shel Ma'ale, and it's made up of Maluchim, and they decide, like it is in the Pusik, in Eve, and in Maluchim, and there's a Bezdin Shel Ma'ale, and they come together. Now they come together at a specific time. The Chacham don't seem to have a problem with them coming together at a specific time. Every year, Rosh Hashana. Now, how do they know if it's Rosh Hashana? They ask us. Is this a crazy thing to believe? No, it's a crazy thing to believe if you believe that Bezdin Shel Ma'ale is like the Kizri believes. So let me. I know the answer to your question. Let me try to explain it clearly. So that's this, and this is my third theory. This is theory number 3. Theory number 3 says that I don't think it's true for Olam Hazeh for the Basilim, but it could be just because I see empirically that it's not true. Again, you could say that I didn't say that. I didn't make the research. Maybe it is true. Chanchka missing. Maybe I'm being stupid here. Maybe it's true. The Bank Mission doesn't say that, but maybe. Aber Kapunim, wie heißt das? And like Bez Shalmal that I didn't see. I think also the Gemara definitely generally doesn't say things that are crazy about the Olam Hazeh, about things that you could easily see. If you can't see, then it's a theory. We're theorizing, maybe. Now in the Ben Shalmal, there's such a thing as din Ben Shalmal. Like Pshat Gemara again. Lefi the shit that there's a din in Rosh Hashana. Rabbi Yossi is cholik, but lefi the shit, there's a din in Ben Shalmal, and that's actually something that happens for real on Rosh Hashana. And they wait for us to tell them when it's Rosh Hashana. Why is it so hard to believe this? What would be the problem with this? We'll talk about the same thing as Shabbos. Let's say there's Shabbos B'Olam Yisraelim, whatever that exactly would mean. It's Nikfal Yidai to Bezdin. Whenever the Yidden Mekalbal Shabbos, it becomes Shabbos in Himmel also. The Gehenim, right? The famous story of the Gehenim. Wait, it's in the Gemara, the story of the Gehenim after Shabbos? It's in the Shulchan Aruch, right? Shulchan Aruch says, in Reish Tzadikai, where does it come from? That we should do, we say we Rachem, so the Rishon is to go out of Gehenim for 3 seconds more, right? It's based on, I don't know if it's in the Gemara, it's in, no, it doesn't say where it is. It's in Ilchas Ish is Perek Beis, I think. Where the Rambam has Ilchas Basila, what's a Basila? There's such a, I don't know if what's the source of this, but at least this assumes that the Gehenim, it's real. See, you can't make this abstract. Actually, and Chanami, the Gehenim, but the Gehenim, which is managed by the corporate, God Incorporated, whatever, by his Pamalia, whatever, his company, they wait for us to make Oz Shabbos. And you can ask each stu to get the kashas, but that's the story that it says in this halach. And they wait for us to make Oz Shabbos. That's we decide when it's Shabbos. We don't decide for the sun just does its job. But the things that could be changed, this is something that could be changed, the Gehenim, because there's someone that actively goes and turns on the Gehenim and off, right? There's a guy that with his hand on the knob over there in Gehenim that turns it, a malach, right? Yeah. What's the problem with this? There's no problem with believing this in Chazal's world. I'll tell you what the problem is. I'll tell you why the Rishonim, the Kizri doesn't really, it's hard to understand how he believes it, or at least he has to add a whole elaborate system for believing in this. Because for the Rishonim, or even the Mekabulim, this is not actually how the Himmel works. Even assuming that there is a Himmel, they always see it as a system. Because they're trying to understand it. And them understanding means to understand the logic, what's the cause of everything. And therefore they would have to say there's something with the Samalchus, and the Samalchus is the seventh day, and therefore then you're stuck with saying how could we change the Midas Samalchus. Understand? So there's two things. People sometimes confuse these two things. There's one thing which is believing that there are Maluchim or Sfiras, it doesn't matter what, whatever, celestial beings, okay? Things that are not us and not God, something in between, okay? That's one thing to believe that they exist, and we can say the Ram doesn't believe they exist. He actually does, but let's pretend that he doesn't. And the Mekabulim believe that they do exist. People usually put this dichotomy. So if you don't believe that exists, of course, Shabbos can't change what happens there because there's nothing to change. It could change what happens in your mind. And if you believe it does exist, maybe you could change it, right? But really, there's a third, much more important machlokes, much more important chakira, which is, does the heaven incorporated work according to the very defined rules, or according to natural? In other words, does it have a nature? And I think this may be a machlokes about the whole nature in some sense, right? The Rishonim all assume generally that nature is a deterministic thing. This is Aristotle's way of thinking about nature. There's causes for everything, and that's how the world actually works. And it doesn't matter if it's a metaphysical world or a physical world. All of the worlds work according to law. Law is not really the correct word. According to nature, we talked about this in a different class, right? Because law is already saying that it's roots, and God is making the laws. Kelly, that's the Newton's intuition. But he didn't think of it as a law. He thought about it as a nature. The nature of the thing means that it's going to do this by definition, by what it is. And therefore, it becomes, you start needing a theory, for example, for Nevi'ah, right? Why did the Malach come on this day? Why did this Malach come? In Chazal, we don't find this kind of systemization. We don't find this kind of naturalization of everything. We assume that there are Malachim, but they could change their mind. They could one day do like this and one day like that. You understand? There's not this. So we can make as a zach that. Yeah, when you say Matzah Shabbos, then we're going to turn back on the Gehenim.
There's a nature, but it's not a real nature.
It's a fuzzy nature. There's a nature in the sense it exists. These are two questions. Does it exist? And does it exist in in a deterministic way? Does it work by laws,
It never works for the
or at least by very sharp laws, by very strict laws? And the chumim and generally myth in general, medrash generally mythological thinking generally doesn't believe. This is the whole difference between science and myth in a certain sense, that it doesn't believe in fixed laws. That's why I talked about this. That's why, just to be clear, that's why in Chazal's thinking, although they do think that there's probably Shabbos and Himmel and there's Gehenna and all these things, they don't never think of asking the question, what happens if I have. There's another reason we discussed. Maybe they didn't laugh at that there's difference in places, which is we have to get to also. But even mitzvah, the theory that they have of the heaven, they don't worry about. So when is Shabbos in America and Israel? Because their Himmel doesn't work in such a natural way. This is beide. This is not a oilam where this is not like I'm Makshim Ba'aguda. This is not a world where such kashas are toifus, right? We never ask the kasha. Again, someone asked this kasha, but the Chum don't really think this is a real kasha. It's philosophers think this is a real kasha, right? I mentioned the story of Hakam Shchinte Islachi, right? The Shchina is Guli Emuam. Okay, and if one Yid goes here and one Yid goes here, where does the Shchina go? It goes with both. You don't even need to have a theory. The Shchina is mifshit, so you go, this is a terror to look for the Goyim. That I'm going right in that story, I think it is. He asked him how many Shchina says, it's like the sun that comes. I think he doesn't really believe that. In other words, that's not how he thinks. That's not how Medrash generally thinks. They don't generally think of like, we have to have a theory, it's mifshit, and therefore it's kind of, this is beide. This is not a olam hachikim. This is not a olam even about the nature on this world, they probably don't think about it like this. But they definitely don't think about it about maluchim and things like that. I'm maluch echad oish neshlichis, sometimes. Even that is only like a general, there's always a yotzim and a klal. There's always, it's not really, if that's what I'm getting at, it's very fuzzy, very alive. In other words, it's very analogous to actual how humans work, right? It's very human, very menschlich. Yeah, I got jede Woche Adam v'siken. Is there a law that says you daven v'siken? No, if you'll be by chasna, I won't daven v'siken. What do you mean? You don't have to have a rule for everything. This is ganz kit, right? Very, very human way of understanding the world, right? I thought of an example in Muslim of this dichotomy. In Google, they had a cloud. People used to call them and ask them that they have a search engine and it gives the obviously wrong answer, right? For something, I don't remember. Or for example, it gives sometimes one of the hunt is already different, but one of the things was that if you search for Jew, it gives you some Nazi website, because according to the halachas of the search engine, whatever mentions the word Jew the most, that's what has to be the first link. And since this guy talks about Jews a lot, it's a Nazi, so that's what you get. And they called him and they said, and officially their answer always was, they used to, and then now they changed their mind already. But their answer was that you're right, I get the Tana, something is wrong. But our whole idea is we have to have a machine. If we're going to have to change every result by hand, we might as well just have a directory service where you call the Chochem. Our whole thing is there has to be a rule. You could tell me which rule I should change, so this should turn out to be a different result. That's a good Tana. We have to see that that's like a good rule, a general rule. But I can't go around making exceptions manually, because then that's not Google. I'm trying to have a law. I'm trying to make rules, because I'm trying to have computers work for me. I'm not trying to be the guy that knows everything. I'm just throwing you a very, very clear example of how it also shows you what the problem with this approach is, right? But it shows you how this is a difference of someone thinking in a law way or someone thinking in a personal way. And the personal not just thinks, tu es jetzt. He says, ich bin nicht kein Mensch, ich bin eine Maschine. And the science thinks of nature like this. And science, including all the Kizri, including the Rishonim, which almost all have a natural theory of the universe. They think of the nature like this. You can't ever call them up and say, please make a change. That's a nes. It happens once in a billion years. That's Hadudich Siv Nes. In the Rishonim understanding of Nes. We discussed this a different time. The Pusik doesn't have the whole problem. Because it's like a person. Generally, he wakes up at a certain time, but you could call him up and ask him a favor. That's how the Gemura, the Chumash, understands a Nes. You have to convince God, you have to convince the Malach, whatever it is. It's not, you don't have to change the whole system of how the universe works for a Nes to happen, right? We discussed this a few times about Nes. And that's why, to them, it's no problem to say there is a Himmel, and it generally works like this, but if they make a Shabbos, it's gonna, it's like you, showing. So that's it's the same idea. If there is a nature of the Himmel, there's no Himmel. But it's not, doesn't work with, you don't have to create a law for everything. It's just, be'erich. It's menschlich. That's why that's why
That's
this,
not Ratzon? You don't call that Ratzon at all?
you could call this Rutzen, but Rutzen is already assuming that there's a shit, then we have to break it. You could call it Rutzen, but I wouldn't call it Rutzen, I would call it a human level, human scale thinking. Because I give you an example, because that's what makes it easier. This is what I'm thinking now. It makes it easier to think about it. In other words, like the difference in dealing with Amazon or dealing with your local grocery. I think this is a very good mushal. Amazon also has humans, but assuming that let's imagine Google, whatever, some companies like this, their sign, they have a sign. It's actually true. The people that make these companies, because they're such kind of people, they think in computer science terms. They're not humanistic. They're very machine yakish. Yeah, no, it's more than it's worse than yakish. Like autistic, like it's mathematicians. Alles are numbers. That's chok. There was mich geknaiz on the chok anders. Then gered mit dich. But I don't want to be. That's true. They have a huge. They're not crazy for thinking this. The reason Google exists is because of this. But in the old-fashioned, but you see how this keeps on. The world becomes more and more mechanistic. Right? That's really the word. Than personal, right? If you go to the grocery, it's even in the grocery, right? In the old-fashioned grocery, you tell him, he takes his pencil, he writes down, the uncle owes me $5, nem dan brood, and next week you'll pay me, right? If you go to the hand grocery, that's your thing. There has to be an account, and there isn't, but you have to there's a ganze system, you have to talk with the president to get an account in the grocery, because he's law and there's food. It's like it's very different. Or if you go to the self-checkout, then there's definitely give me your card. There's a rule for everything. This is very two different ways of thinking about how the world works, about how society should work also, but it's just showing you how this is really the difference. And Chazal are very personalistic. They have a lot of theories about things, but they don't have theories. They always talk about God as a person. They know that God's not a person, but they think that it's the structure of thinking is personal. Yeah, I can convince them. Yeah, there is a Midas Rachman, but they don't think of it as like there's a button that you press that makes Midas Adin into Midas Rachman. Think about it like we're convincing him, or like, see, it's of course there's a roots, and you understand why I don't like the shittas roots, and sometimes it means this. We have to differentiate what we mean, right? The shit is a person, and the Catholics, the people that use this language better. But shit is a root. Sometimes you assume there's like an abstract root, because we don't want to talk about it on a personal level, and it's still not what I'm getting at, right? Because shit is a root is sort of is really, at least the way it's okay. It's where the modern world ends up, where things are or like the Kalam people, where there's no rules, there's nothing really, and it's all nominalistic, just God's nominalism, God's mind. You understand? I don't think that's Chazal's theory. This is literally the modern theory. There's nominalism and there's realism. So there's nominalism. Then you could say there's nominalism, but not of your mind, but of God's mind. That's basically the Briska Shitta, right? It's decided by your mind, but of course it's true because it's in God's mind, so you can't change it arbitrarily. That's not what Chazal think. Chazal think that God, there is some things going on. It's just personal. It's like there's like the grocery, and he can't just do. It's not roots, and it's like everything pops into existence, right? Just by roots. No, there's a grocery has shelves. But if you ask him, please move me against the, we can treffen wegen. You can find loopholes. You can find not even a loophole, like in a legal sense, right? You could can sich durchwischen sometimes, like, it's very different way of thinking.
It could be also understood in two different ways. It could be considered that it's not really pure Ratzon, it's some kind of thing, or it could be like it's just the common Ratzon.
Yeah. And
then that's like I said, it's not like it's not real. It's not.
Yeah. Okay. That's about the nature. Not sure. That's the Chaznische Ratzon. Right. Of course. He. Yeah. I don't know what he thinks, and I don't know. Because he's trying to say there's nature, but it's in God's mind. That's basically the modern theory of nature. I mean, the modern theistic theory, or deistic theory, maybe. I think that's basically that. Yeah, but that's not what the Aristotelian theory is, right? And also not what Chazal's theory is. No, yeah, this is the third theory, and that's what I'm saying here. Yeah, I think so. Okay, so now, eventually we have to get, what I was trying to do today was not to do philosophy. I wanted to show how this is all really the halacha. But we're very late already. Wait, I have to just say that there's a fourth theory. So let's just chazit, let me chazit, so be clear. So the one, you could say that there's a time and then it can't be changed and so on. Number two, you could say that, what are the two other theories that I just said? That it's just, everything is nominalist, everything is in our mind, which is important, but it's just in our mind. Right? Number three, you could say that the Himmel draait sich harim ins, and over here we got into these three ways of understanding what nature is, which is really what defines if you could say this or how you could say this, right? If you're a legal person that believes that heaven has laws, then you can't really say it in Chazal's way. You have to say it you have a problem. Either you could be the kizzy in which it doesn't really work. Doesn't seem to have the idea of tzaddik goyz v'akishbach for real, right? Or you could be a mekibel which has sort of a system for tzaddik goyz. He says, well, there's a law, but the law requires humans, and therefore humans can at some step get involved in it. That's the mekibulim the shita generally of all these things. Right? Or you could just be simple and say I don't know what the shit of the pushti and this people that bring the Magamish in the other way is. Right? That's stimmt also. There's the three ways of understanding this. So the Chassidim are generally very closer to Chazal. Like the Tzaddik says, and God is somewhat very personal to them. But for the Chassidish stories at least, I don't know about Chabad. They generally have a very personal God. Very in the sense, not in the sense of root, not in the sense of I'll get him to do what I need sometimes, but it's shviru, he thinks like that. Okay.
Why do you think Chabad doesn't have that?
Because Chabad is Rambam. Chabad are abstract. Chabad they try to have a theory of these things, which is, but they don't have this kind of level. Okay. Now, of course, there's a fourth shitta which I have to get to because I think that the Chazanish is touching this. There's a fourth shitta about Halacha, right? About Shabbos, for example. And the fourth shitta says something like this, which I have to, because you were asking me in the beginning about the Chazanish. The fourth shitta would say, let's taking the example of the Basilim. The fourth shitta would say something like this: there is no reality about Basilim. Says Nish, there is a reality and we have to find it. Nish, there is a reality and we don't care what it is. Nish, there is a reality and we decide what it should be. These are the first three shittas, right? Nor, there is no such a thing as reality. What do I mean? By the Basilim, it's easy to show what I mean. I don't actually know anything about about the science of Basilim. I think that scientifically it's kind of a halfway, not really a real thing. Bechlal, very not clear what exactly it even means. So that's another thing. But assuming that there's such a thing and something that corresponds to what people Chum are talking about, there is epics, but there's not mamish. The image that we have, not only Chum, the society, culture has, is not literally true. I don't know, maybe they're lying to me. But assuming there's such a thing, and assuming that it's some kind of change from when you're 2 to 3, right?
Oh, you think there's no such a thing by 3?
No, there's barely such a thing. I'm not getting into this. There is something, but there's not like with this very grab image. Okay, I don't know, maybe I'm not. That's what I've read. The word is something else. Assuming that there's some change, and probably again, I'm assuming there's some truth to it. They didn't make up things in the Welten, right? When you're very little, there's.
They said there's no thing there.
Yeah, there's something that we could sort of right. It's just connected. It's not like it's not machen halachin or something like that, which is how you understand it somehow. But
Okay, it sounds like you could bypass it.
Yeah, because it's more complicated than it seems. You have all these, we got check and these dublit. The blood doesn't really come from piercing something, and not really how it works. Okay, that's not relevant. We're talking about something else. We're talking about the difference between when you're very small, it's somewhat softer from something like that, so it doesn't do whatever damage the bia does, right? That's the story, right? And then it says that's the Gemara's line, right? It's soft. It's somehow liquidy. Somehow exactly how it looks in the right? And then after some age, it becomes more. These are developments that happen. I don't know exactly how it happens. You ask your doctor, but it's very simple. Everyone understands this, and this is the Chanish's shmis about Kavatarich sort of starts with this kind of even a more radical sense. You'll see. Everyone understands that nothing actually happens when you turn 3, right? I'll give you a very nice example of this thing. Everything is a talich, right? I'll give you an example that I think this is the pshat, is that we have for a girl we have 2 levels of adulthood, right? We have something called a nara and something called a bageres. And why? You ever thought about it? Stam randomly 6 months after she's a nara, she's a bageres. What's the point of this whole thing? But the point is that I think the pshat certainly have a different pshat, is that puberty, which is what we're trying to get at, which is what we think of as becoming a good, at least in a physical sense, is not something that happens overnight. You start, and then it takes a few months until now you're already g'doyle. Now everything works. So this be'erich, again, the number of 6 months, auch be'erich, but be'erich, this period is what we call nara. And of course, there's a lot of social reasons, but I'm not getting into all the implications of this, but at least the bodily, the physical reality of this, is that it's something that doesn't happen at once. Nothing in the world happens at once. I don't know, you look for stai status and the days, the one night, two stai status, I don't know, maybe, but even that, stai status is just a simon, right? It's not what makes it. It's the strong. So we have to, in other words, like we talk about Rabbi Yirmiyah's kind of questions always, right? We have to decide some sort of, since it's law, and since law likes to deal with absolute limits, with nicht limits, with gvilim, right, with borders. We have to decide. We have to decide a cutoff. Until when are you small and when are you big, right? So of course it has to be connected to reality. If the reality would be that you become big when you're 6. Okay. If the reality would be that when you're 6, it wouldn't make sense. So it's somewhere between 2 and 4. But this is what the Chum says when it's 3. That's sort of a somewhat arbitrary cutoff point, just for the law to work. All laws, human laws, all laws in Halacha work like this. Everyone knows that Halacha works like this. So therefore, and then you ask the Chacham Akam, when you say 3, you mean 3 of the calendar or 3? Yeah, 3 of the calendar. Because the whole thing is fake. No, not fake. The whole thing is a limit. It's a fake, right? It's based. It's a kiddush to reality. It's maybe al Rav. It's like there's like chazukah of Rav. Is it 12 exactly? 30? It's a chazukah. Right. The Chazanish holds like this, and he talks about it in that line also. But I want to understand.
That's where it is. It's taken from there.
No, not sure. I'm not sure. Could be. He talks about it. He's very into this. That's a fourth way of thinking about it, though, right? You have to understand. This is nicht, was the Magen Mishnah sagt. Nicht, was the Rosh Hashana sagt. Nicht, was the Chum sagt. And nicht, was the Rambam sagt.
The Magen Mishnah saying that's what Mishnah saying again?
We don't care. The Torah is what Chum say. Of course, you could push this into some of the 3 theory. You could push it into Rambam's theory. You could push it into all the theories, right? You could push it into the. You can't. The only theory you can't push it into is the first, right? This could be a pshat of all the other 3 theories. Other 2.
What's the numbers again?
Number 1 is that there's a reality and it's science. We have to be mecham to reality and zeo. That you can't push it into. Either she's a psila, whatever the nafkamina is, also it's a fact. Others, it's binary. And the second theory is that we don't care about the facts. We're nominalists. You could push it in. You could say, this is what we mean. We don't talk. We're kavayet lefi haskama. This is considered a gudel. You could always, like the Chazanish would say, gudel. He says it in gudel. I could say gudel at every age. I could make an argument why it's called a gudel. And the Chazanish says, and it's true, that legabe this halacha, this is a gudel. Legabe that halacha, that's a gudel. It's not like one thing called gudel. It's not an essence. There's no essence of gudel. It's a scale, and we decide, and we put down border blocks whenever we find it correct to put the border blocks. Okay, so, right?
He says this clearly, or you saying?
Yeah, he says it clearly by some halachas. Yeah, by kiddush, by 18 hours, he says it clearly. By kiddush Yitzchok, he says very clearly this. Yeah. He says both from clearly over there. Yeah, like philosophically he says it. Yeah, he thinks like this. And shine. So that it could match with that theory, but it's not just sharfkat of that theory. What's it afkamin? I want to let's just finish. You could match with the third theory that this is, maybe you could say this is what it means. It doesn't really, right? This is what we mean when we say that we have power over the nature. We just mean that we could. Of course, that's the reality. I think that's when the people that say that, I think that's what they mean, because I don't really think that they mean nisam happen all the time. But it's just useless. Then you're just saying nothing. It's very right.
They mean?
I think that all the people that quote the Yerushalmi Kepshita, they mean this. They mean that there's no reality. It's a very, very fuzzy thing. So the Halacha has the power to decide that Hanikra, Le'inyan Halacha, this has the Aktana or whatever. It's Ke'eli, we're not changing the body, we're changing the Chalas of the body, right? We're changing the Mesyachsis, the Halacha, the Mesyachsis to this body. That's the fourth Mahalach. But I think that the fourth Mahalach and the third one, wherever I'm up to, are really. I don't have a way of reading the third one without putting in my mind the fourth one. Ich weiß nicht, was ich zu sagen. Right? But now, the important thing is that there's a big difference between this Mahalach, and this is where I don't understand the Chazanish. Once we're at this philosophy, I don't understand. If you understand things like this. There's two things what I don't understand. Number one is then this fourth theory, and it's probably the reality when you think about most halachas. In other words, this is what seems to be going on actually. I wanna be clear about this. This fourth theory is actually what I think is going on for the most part. Nilchas Treifus and most halachas. And most halachas are like this. In other words, they're not. That should be clear what I think. They're not random. That is, these 70 things are called Treifus or whatever. No, it's Treife, we know what it is. Treife means Treife. And we have to make rules for it. We can't just say, decide, ask a doctor. We want it to be rules because law likes rules, because we like sharp boundaries. So we're going to give you these 18, whatever, this list of sharp boundaries. And of course, if you'll ask me sometimes, this is the halacha is kavai, right? It's adechot. Not like the I don't know which shit it is, whether it's metaphysical. You see, that's already a fifth shit that I have to understand, right? The fifth shit, let's just be clear. The fifth shit is a much shviros shit, the moral shit, right? What's the fifth shit? I'm not sure what it is. This is why it's sort of a mishmash. The fifth shit is that when we say ktana, we don't mean ktana. We mean mehis ktana, which is not correspond to the actual ktana. That's literally what the Maral says. And the problem with this is that this is a real mess up of essential and non-essential thinking. I don't know what it even is supposed to mean. You understand? I know that it's not the first one to use these kind of things, right? We have this theory of essences, right? Which is the first theory, right? Things have essences, and this is actually a ktana, and this is not. But that's like we said, that's a deterministic theory. That's a very real theory, right? Very realist theory. And then you say, wait, but I'm a chochem, and I can tell you that the essence of it is not what it looks. Right? The essence is something else. Of course, that's also true in some sense. But you can't go against what the essence that you see. That's already a nominalist theory, right? Nominalist in the sense of that I'm prioritizing what I'm saying over what I see, right? So then this is sort of a really funny harkova of the radical nominalism and radical realism in this sense, right? It's saying the reality is what I say. I don't even know what this is supposed to mean. I could sort of figure out what they're trying to say, but my four things are much clearer to my mind, right? But I'm just saying now. But what? Okay, you already know the problem that I have with this. Just in this structure, you see why it's a confusion of these two things. Now, you could say, and what I'm trying to get at is, when you say when I'm saying the most halachas are the fourth thing, what I mean to say is also not that, right? It's not just telling you the truth, which is actually what the Kizri says about Treifus. The Kizri says literally that from Treifus we see what great doctors Chum were. And it might be true because there's a lot of detail maybe, but it's not true that these Gedurim of Treifus are the fear. They're Gedurim Halucha, not based on the fear. They're both not the essence of Treifus, like the Maral. They're also not the reality of Treifus, because reality is too messy for law to deal with. They were kiddiv on that reality, right? Like you're saying the Chazanish. Right? Now, in other words, and they're also not the second theory that we totally don't care about the reality, we somewhat care about the reality. And they're also not giving us a power over the reality, except in a legal sense, right? In the eyes of the law, this is a Treifus. We could talk about it as a power over reality, but it's not power over the reality. But what I don't get here is how this then becomes, how strong this becomes, you see? Because if you understand things like this, then two things. Number one, I'm 100% sure that if you understand Halacha Treifus, for example, as a kiddiv to reality, it can't be diametrically opposed to reality, right? It has to be in the Gegend targets, right? And in the neighborhood, verstehe. You ask me why 13 is a good law, not 14. But if you ask me why 13, not 72, then that doesn't work, right? You can't totally ignore the reality, right? Maybe the Chazanish works like this in a lot of halachas, especially ayin. That's one thing. And number two, if we see, and this is really a historical question, if we see someone creating such a law based on how he understood the reality, because of this, it should change if I understand the reality different, because it's not totally abstract, right? In other words, it's relevant. The Chazanish tries to make it irrelevant. I think it's openly what he says. It's irrelevant if the Rishonim didn't know about America because they're saying al gazetz. But of course it's relevant. I think that's why he denies that they didn't know. But of course it's relevant. Because this gives you an image of the world which should change how you misachas it also. Maybe it shouldn't. We can argue about it. But you can't say it's irrelevant because instead the only way you could really say it's irrelevant is if you totally don't care about reality at all. If you just say, this is nominalist, there is no reality b'chlal. But once there's a shtickle reality, now the Chazanish in Kavatach tried to say there's no reality at all. I don't think that he's right in that. Okay, we have to get this, and we have to also try to see if it's metaphysically true or if it relates to what we discussed earlier about Shabbos, Bereshis, and so on. I'm not sure. But the Chazanish in Kavatach, I think this is his big chiddush, and this is why, to finish, his big thing over there is that there is no reality because, you see, the world is a globe, so a globe doesn't have any beginning and any end. Very clearly says this. And therefore, everything that we're down is just how we're going to look at it, some kind of tziris yachsis. And therefore, we have to go the tziris yachsis of the Rishonim, one, because they're the Gemurah, and even if they're not the Gemurah, they're Mechayev. He doesn't ever explain why, but that's what he says. Even if it's just the Sfura of the Rishonim, we have to follow this Sfura. I don't think that that's historically correct. And other people say this. I don't think it's true that they're starting off with an idea that we're just making an arbitrary line. Of course, to some extent, it's arbitrary.
They were based on a reality thing.
And at least on a reality, which is that this is the yeshiv and this is where it starts and which is where it ends, and we could argue about exactly where to start and not exactly. But they don't actually start with this picture of a globe where there's no beginning and end, and we're just making things up. Totally haskum. But they don't actually start with this halacha. None of them. Almost none of them. Maybe there's some. Because for different reasons, we could get into why. But I don't think that in that sense, it's because he's so abstracts it. So I think this is also a general way of the Chazanish thing. Because he totally doesn't think that the reality matters. In other words, he knows that it doesn't match with the way they read it. He tries to say that it never mattered at all. And this is where he's very rationalist in the sense of it's totally mifshed, and a kav doesn't have a shet. The whole Torah, so he's very impressed by the cycle being mifshed. He is. And that's true, but I don't think halacha is that of a mifshed cycle in this sense. That's okay. Okay, it's it.
You want me to do this here?
Now we have to. No, you can take it. I'm not going to read it now. No, now we have to go back to show why or why not. This is the question of where Shabbos is matters to this or not.
I was going to talk a little more about this also. My head's outside of it.
Okay.